couple of weeks ago, Kirsten Gillibrand's an early copy of her book was leaked, and in it there were a lot of allegations about sexual harassment, and she identified, not by name, but by comment, a number of different senators and representatives who'd said lewd and offensive things to her. One of them was that one of them grabbed her around the waist and said, "I like my girls chubby." Now, at the time, the hosts of Morning Joe were not happy about the fact that she said that, but then didn't identify them. They called it weak. In case you didn't see that, here is that clip.
If Kirsten Gillibrand was sexually harassed by men, right? If Kirsten Gillibrand was sexually harassed by other senators, because this is like the big thing about the book, right?
Right.
This is so horrible how what beasts these men were, and I'm sure they were. Doesn't she have a right to the constituents of these beasts? Because these men, after all, represent millions and millions of people.
Yeah.
In the district. And don't women have the right to know which men come up and say, "I like my girls chubby," and coming up squeezing her?
Squeezing her stomach.
Squeezing parts of her body? Doesn't she have a responsibility to name names? I think she should.
No one is naming names. And I think that's weak.
I think it's weak too.
If someone is squeezing your tummy and saying, "I like my women chubby," I want to know who that guy is.
By the way, first thing I noticed there is that there were 3 people at the table. There were 17 coffee mugs on that table. I have no idea why. I guess it's part of the branding. But anyway, so it was very weak to not identify it. Now, the person has been identified, not by Kirsten Gillibrand, but by an anonymous staffer who knew at the time what was going on. And it was the late Senator Daniel Inouye of Hawaii, a Democrat. Has been identified. Again, not by Kirsten Gillibrand. So they sort of got what they wanted. The person has been identified. Unfortunately for them, he is dead, so he can't sort of answer to it. But are they going to be happy about this, that they got what they want? Apparently not. They talked about it on their show. The video was available online up until recently and it has since been taken down, which is a little bit suspect, but not before quotes were written down, and we have that for you. So Mika said, "I think that I remember getting pinched by Strom Thurmond and thinking it's Strom Thurmond. I don't know. I don't buy it," talking about the fact that it was Daniel Inouye. Joe says, "You don't buy that?" She responds, "I don't buy that. May I say that?" He says, "So you think somebody on her staff's trying to blame the dead guy so they don't get starting asking the live guy?" She says, "Come on, don't put this on me. Do you buy it?" They don't want to actually identify what they think about this really, but Scarborough says, "No, I don't buy it for a second." Mika says, "Do you buy it, Willie? Would either of you feel comfortable grabbing my tummy right now? Would that be appropriate?" And that's, by the way, part of the process, making sure that nobody can do that, and if they do, then you call them out. So, I mean, what do they want? Do they want her to go to the cemetery and kick his coffin?
It's clear to me that they didn't believe her from the beginning. From the very beginning, when these allegations came out, instead of focusing on what those allegations are and how problematic it could be as a person who is in Congress, as a member of Congress, they decided to change the narrative and focus on whether or not what she was saying was true. And at first, they didn't say that they weren't buying it. They started with, "Why doesn't she name names? Why doesn't she name names?" And they pretended as though they did that, or they were asking that because they wanted to ensure that we could reveal and identify who these very dangerous members of Congress are. You know, if they're sexually harassing other members of Congress, we should know who they are. They weren't concerned about that. The reason why they were pointing to that is because they questioned the legitimacy of her claims.
Exactly.
And now that a name has been named, they continue to question the legitimacy of her claims. Now they're just a little more overt and explicit about it.
Yeah, I love that you pointed out that. I mean, what Joe said in that first clip, it was using every term he could to make it sound as if he was pushing for women's rights, but was only saying, "Oh, a woman was harassed. Here is what women do wrong when that happens." So you're exactly right. And look, we don't know for sure. We can't know for sure if it was the senator of Hawaii. We do know that back in 1993, he was accused of raping a hairdresser, and there were at least 9 other allegations of sexual harassment against him. Look, we don't know the facts of those cases or if he was actually guilty of them. But with that in the context, it's not impossible to imagine he might have made what he probably saw as a jovial and joking comment to her.
And also keep in mind that if there are, and I'm sure there are, members of Congress that she felt sexually harassed her in some way, she's still a member of Congress who has to deal with them, right? So it's very easy for people like Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough to sit in a studio in New York and say, why don't you name names? Why don't you name names? It's a lot more complicated than that. And the reason why she brought this up was because it's obviously an issue within Congress that should be addressed, but what do you do if you're not going to name names? Do you just pretend like the problem doesn't exist at all?
Yeah.
Do you just ignore it? Do you brush it under a rug? I mean, she's in a really difficult position.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and at the very least, she did in her book identify that it's happening so that we can at least think about it, perhaps do something to stop it from happening. And I don't think that requires a name.